Hi everybody, I'm Rick Beato. In today's Everything Music, we're going to talk about the guitar style of jazz guitar legend Pat Metheny. It's coming up next. Pat Metheny was born on August 12, 1954 in Lee Summit, Missouri. He began playing guitar when he was 14 years old, and by the time he was 18, he was going to school for music, this is in 1972, at the University of Miami, where he was quickly offered a teaching job. He was apparently much better than any of the other guitar players, and they had such an overload of students that they offered him to be the second guitar teacher there. A year after that, he was given a teaching assistantship up at the Berklee College of Music in Boston by Gary Burton, the famous vibes player. Pat then developed a relationship playing with Gary in his quintet, which also featured Mick Goodrick, who I studied with when I was in college back in the 80s in Boston. And that led to Pat getting his first solo record deal on ECM Records, where he released the record Bright Size Life. Now, many of you know that record. It's a very, very famous jazz record, and it features Jaco Pastorius, really on his first big recording, and Bob Moses on drums. This record, when it came out, was, I think Pat said it sold about 900 copies at the time during its life cycle when it had first come out, and then went on to be a big selling jazz record. And it's really, really famous, not just a jazz guitar record, but just a famous jazz record, period. And it has some of Jaco's, what I think is some of Jaco's greatest playing on it. This is pre-Weather Report, pre-Jaco first record. So Pat then, after Bright Size Life, we're going to get into some of these records too, but just give a little historical perspective. Pat's second solo record was called Watercolors, which came out in 1977 and featured Lyle Mays on piano, who was later to become his partner for years in the Metheny group, Eberhard Weber on bass, and Danny Gottlieb on the drums. This record was the kind of the start of the Metheny group, but I wouldn't say it was really the official, that wasn't the official quartet. That actually happened on the next record called the Pat Metheny Group. And that featured Pat, Lyle on keyboards and synthesizers, or piano and synthesizers, Dan Gottlieb on the drums, and Mark Egan on the bass. Now, Mark was a fretless bass player that played very much in the style of Jaco Pastorius, and there's even a song on there called Jaco that Pat wrote as a in honor of Jaco, and it sounds like a Jaco style bass part in it. That record featured songs that were in the real book, like April Joy, Phase Dance. Phase Dance became kind of the Metheny track that they'd open every concert with. A lot of you that are Metheny fans would recognize this if you followed him back in the 70s and 80s, but it goes kind of like this. So on and so forth, like that. It starts out in this B minor 11 to B flat, major 7 or major 9, which he solos on for the most part. I read interviews where he says he would play that song first because he felt like it cleared the air and was a great song, up-tempo song to kind of start out with. I should mention on the first record, on Bright Size Life, a lot of those tunes are in the real book. The real book is a jazz, for those of you that don't know, is a book that came out in the 70s. It was an illegal fake book. And many of Pat's tunes were in there, like Bright Size Life. That was on there. There was a song called Unity Village. There was a song called, there was Exercise Number 4, Exercise number 6. He had a lot of tunes were called Exercise. They didn't even have the names because I think that the real book was written, well, Pat was, before the record had even come out. And when they were called Exercises, each song kind of has an interval that is related to it. For example, Bright Size Life is based on Perfect Fifths, or the opening riff. There's fourths there, but so Perfect Fifth. So it's using 3 successive fifths in it in the opening riff. Unity Village uses major sevenths, is based on major sevenths. But this is a really cool example of an Aeolian sound. He's using the 2 major seventh intervals that are found in the Aeolian mode. So between C and B, and then between E and F, those are both major seventh intervals that are both in the Aeolian mode. There was another one called Missouri Uncompromised that's is something like this. And what is that is based on fourths. So that's got fourth, 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 but each song featured a different interval, or was written around different interval combinations that I think Pat was into at the time. What I'd like to talk about next is Pat's sound. Since it was such an identifiable thing, that the sound he had on electric guitar, he also has a completely identifiable sound on 12-string on guitar synthesizer, but we'll stick with his sound. So Pat used to play through a ES-175 Blonde that had only one pickup. The second pickup, back pickup that's normally there, was taken out, and it was covered over with duct tape. And he had a toothbrush holding the guitar strap on that was there for years. It was just always there. He would play with flat wound strings, D'Addario Chromes. They are I actually put them on this guitar for this video. And he would play with a Fender thin pick, incredibly thin. I talked to him one time way back in the early 80s when I met him, probably 81 or so, and I asked him about his picks, and he said that he would go through an entire bag and find about 2 picks that he felt were thin enough to use, and he'd discard the rest of them. He played with the side of the pick like this that would give kind of a thwacking sound. Now, because there's more surface area, as opposed to just playing with a point, this would be with a point. Here's playing with a side. It's a different sound. It's got more, when I say more surface area, I mean more of the pick is touching the string in a larger area. And that really affects the sound that you're getting. Now, the idea of using flat wounds, most jazz players would play with flat wounds. And when you slide with flat wounds, it's really easy to slide without having any squeaks. You don't get any squeaks. You don't get any of those in the lower. In the lower register, you get no finger squeaks at all. You hear it right there, nothing. The next thing would be his amplifier that he played through. So Pat used to play through an acoustic 134 guitar amp. They came out in the early 70s. They were an open back 410 amplifier that was, I believe, 125 watts. Here's actually an image of the specs of the amp. It's a 2-channel amp, as you can see, 80 pounds. So it was a pretty hefty amp. And he would use 2 of those amplifiers. Now, with those amplifiers in stereo, he had a series of Lexicon delay units called the Lexicon Primetime. These were the precursors to the Lexicon PCM 41 and 42. The other thing is the pitch change on it, or the chorusing sound. That's done on the prime times. You can see from this photo the VCO, that is essentially where the chorusing is done. It was common on all different types of Lexicon delay units, the PCM 41, PCM 42. This was essentially a chorusing. It would add in, you could actually add the amount of pitch change that you wanted to have in there, and it would give this chorusing effect. It's really more of a detune than a chorus. You can see from the picture here with his setup that he's got the 2 acoustic 134s, and then he's got the 2 prime times set for the 2 different delay lengths, 14 milliseconds, 26 milliseconds. Then above that, he's got 2 MXR digital delays. Those were used to add the 400 to 500 millisecond delay to give his sound some length. That would be sound like that. The 14 millisecond, 26 millisecond give you that chorus, Pat's really chorus guitar sound when you're hearing. When you hear that kind of a sound, and then the longer delays that are done with the MXR digital delays create that whole sonic environment that is so familiar to you with those early Pat Metheny records. I probably saw Pat play about 50 times. In this series, I'm going to talk about Pat's playing from 1975 to 1984, which to me was his most interesting, fertile growth as a player. I always talk about people's 20s to age 30, that is their usually when people are the best improvisers, because they don't have a lot of, they're not set in their ways into a certain type of pattern playing. He was really getting his chops together and improving technically. If you listen to Bright Side's Life, it's technically he could just get his ideas out barely, but by 1984 he had incredibly good chops. He practiced all the time, and he could execute anything he could hear. One of the characteristics to Pat's playing is a really strong left hand. Now, he does a lot of slurring in his early playing. There's you'll see a lot of lines like that where he's going. He doesn't do that as much anymore, but he does do a lot of slides. Another thing you'll hear is repeated patterns. Pat will also do different types of hammer-ons to create this horn-like effect. I talk about it in one of my videos, but he does a quick 1, 2, 3 hammer-on. That's really kind of out of a Wes Montgomery tradition thing. It's the way that jazz guitar players would try and sound like horn players, where you do a quick 3-note grace note. A lot of people think he's sliding in, which he does do sometimes, but if you really listen closely, there's many, as we go over some of the examples, many times you'll hear him do that 1, 2, 3 really quick grace note. It's hard to do, you have to practice it. I just put, I practice it over triads, things like that. Another thing from one time when I got a chance to watch him warm up for about an hour or so, I showed up at a gig it was probably 1981, and he was playing in Rochester, New York, where I'm from, at a place called Nazareth College. And I walked in the afternoon before they did sound check, and I heard Pat. I just drove up there to see if I could walk in on sound check, and I heard Pat practicing. And I remember this would just go on and on and on. Everything, lines, but really regimented practice. He would do chromatic scales. I see him play scales and thirds, chromatic scales and thirds. He'd play a lot of triads, a lot of arpeggiated triads. He'd start down low. Then he'd play. He'd then move on to triads in progressions. Angular lines. Those kind of angular lines like that, or those. Those kind of lines that he'd do a lot of hammer-ons like that, and they would sound really cool. I think because the pick was so thin, and he had such a strong left hand, that there was really no difference. It gave you the impression that all the notes were being picked. He would go up and down scales. He'd take an idea and he'd do the third and the octave. So those kind of ideas. I'd like to start out with some of Pat's early playing and show his approach to playing over changes. This is the first glimpse. When Pat first came out, even with Bright Side's Life, it was hard to tell how much of a jazz player he was. It took a couple records to for myself and for a lot of people to realize that he was really a bebop player, because the Metheny group didn't quite have those kind of songs that you could stretch out on, that he would stretch out on, that would have 2-5-1s, for example. But it would be things like this first little clip I'm going to play you with him playing over a 2-5-1 that gives you a hint of his ability to play over changes. So check this out. Okay, so the progression he's playing over, let's check it out. It starts out on B flat major 7, and then it does a 2-5, E minor 7, A7, to D7 sus4 to D7. He starts on B flat major 7 though. Okay, let's hear it again. Okay, so what is he doing there? It's really cool. So on the B flat major 7 chord, he's playing a B flat Lydian sound. Okay, so he's using this. Then he's going on the E minor. So he's coming down right down an E minor 9 sound, a D major triad, 5th to the 9th to the flat 7, 3rd. Then he goes on the A7 chord, he's going from the 3rd to the sharp 9, back to the 3rd. Then he goes. So that's right out of a dominant diminished scale. And he's going up to the 5th of the chord to the he's ending on that single note. Listen to it again. On the D, it's going back to D minor 7, and you go on slide, and there's 2 slides. You can tell they're slides because the note doesn't die. Listen to it. Slide, slide, right? He always does these things off one string. It's really, really fascinating. So that whole section, it goes like this. So that's your first, that was kind of one of my first glimpses into his ability to play over changes, where he actually sounds like a bebopper there. That was kind of like, wow, that's really interesting. He can definitely play incredibly well over changes. Okay, so this next riff is one that you heard Pat play in a lot of solos, or ones that are similar to this. This is kind of the first time that he does a little bit of it on Bright Size Life, but you really start to hear it now with the group. It's a pentatonic based lick, so check it out. It's over so it's over B flat major 7, B flat major 7 to D minor 9. So he's going so it's a really fast pentatonic line. Listen to it. It's very simple, but yet really cool. So it's over this B flat major 7. That's how the riff ends. Listen to it. Then he's going. Well, that's a D minor 9 pentatonic. Okay, so it's got 9, root, flat 7, 5th. It's in that position. And then he's going to down an A minor pentatonic in 3, in groupings of 3s. He's going. So it's, that's a grouping of 3, then another grouping of 3 off the B string, and then grouping of 3. So it's off the that note, and that note. So that's the first grouping, second grouping. So he's going. So here it is. You'll start to hear Pat do these pentatonic licks. You hear some of them on Bright Side's Life for sure, but that is one. That's him using different pentatonics than you would normally use. So on the B flat major 7 chord, he's using a D minor, right? Which would go perfectly over B flat major 7. So it's the 9th of the chord, the 7th, the 6th, or 13th, 5th. So, okay, but he's doing it up here. So it's D minor pentatonic over this. In a different position. And then when it goes to the D minor 9, he switches to, which is an A minor pentatonic on the D minor 9 chord. So he's swapped out because the difference between the, he's got that and that chord, that and that chord, then when it goes here. So he's wanting to make that change between those two pentatonics so that you hear that F move down to the E, because there is no F in this A minor pentatonic. So A minor pentatonic works over D minor 9 because it gives you the root, 9th, 11, 5th, flat 7, then root, 9, 11, 5th, flat 7. So, and on this, so you're going from here, D minor pentatonic, to A minor pentatonic. Only one note difference between the two scales. Moving on to American Garage, to that record, let's find a couple other quintessential Metheny licks. So here we go. Okay, so he's using a D major pentatonic over a D major chord. So he's going, and he's sliding from the 9th to the 3rd of the chord and playing that 6th interval. So we're out of this, out of that D major pentatonic. Then he's going, so he's using, it's really like a D major blues pentatonic. So you've got the, so it's 1, 2, flat 3, 3rd, 5, 6. That's really a great sound. That's a quintessential Pat sound. Okay, so there's another quintessential Pat. So he's going. But there's a lot of ghosting in there. That's really kind of part of his vibe. This next riff is in the same song, and it's the foreshadowing of Pat's real chromatic period. What I'm talking about is the really close chromaticism on two adjacent strings. Now check the lick out. This is the first time I really heard him play anything like it. Right here. Let me listen to it again. Okay, so he's playing this. Okay, so here's the riff. I'll play it slow. So how does this riff go? You start it with your pinky on the 12th fret of the D string, and you play 10-9, pull off on the G string, and then a fourth finger on the 11th fret of the D, back to your first finger at the 8th fret of the G. And then it finishes. So does the same thing again on 10th fret. 10th fret D string, pull off on the G string from 8-7, fourth finger on the 9th fret of the D string to the first finger at the 6th fret of the G string. Then he's going. He's got some ghost notes in there. I've got about 2 hours of material. I haven't even gotten past a couple of lines here into the deep part of Pat's playing, which I'm going to get into in the next couple episodes of this. So I'm going to do at least a 3-part series on Pat's playing, because it's there's a lot of material to cover. That's all for now. I'm